This story begins in darkness, a jet black, wet expanse. Nothing to see anywhere, and no light to reflect off of the murky, deep waters surrounding everything. No breeze to cause a ripple. Completely, inescapably, forever wrapped in nothingness. The concept of zero. The standing place before the beginning. No stars. Silence so heavy that it would put pressure on the ears, if there were any. This is and has always been the state of things. Until the voice booms from the expanse, echoing off of the watery walls. "Let there be light," says the booming voice. And suddenly, a shapeless glow cuts through the piercing veil of dark, creating scales of light on the still waters. This light is good, and the dark is good. So the voice, the maker of worlds, divides the two. Now there is darkness and light. Balance. He calls the light day and the dark night. The first day has passed. The golden glow cuts through the void once more, bringing on the second day. The voice booms again. "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And it is so. Now the water is divided above the firmament and below it, and our booming voice God calls this heaven. The second day has passed. It is now time to create earth. On the third day, God says, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." This is earth and sea. God sees that this too is good. God says, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." So the earth brings herb-yielding and fruit-yielding plants, and God sees that this is good. On day 4, God sees that the light floods the earth, or the darkness floods the earth. There is no form to the luminescence, and this is not good. So he creates form. The light condenses into a ball, creating bright spots in the carpet of grass, and spidery shadows through the branches of fruit trees. He puts light in the darkness too, a softer light, to cast dim rays over the dew-covered landscape. These lights are to be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. In a still echoing voice, God declares that this too is good. The fourth day has come and gone. There needs to be someone to enjoy this garden, this created oasis, God thinks. So God creates the beasts that swim, walk, and crawl the earth. Now azure-flecked lizards scurry through the sun-soaked ivy, and furry beasts graze the dates fallen from overflowing trees. God blesses them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply," and sees that it is good. The fifth day. Now the sun rises on the 6th day, and God is ready for his biggest feat yet, creating man in his own image. What, though, is his image? What does a God of a universe filled with nothing look like? Is he form? Is he vapor? God creates man in his own unnamed image and sees that it is good. God gifts man with the garden he has created and sends this primordial spirit down into Eden. The evening and the morning complete the day. The heavens and the earth are finished, so God rests. The 7th day is blessed, the work is done, until duty calls again. God realizes that there is no one to till the earth and to maintain his creation. A man in the image of heaven cannot participate in earthly duties. So God forms a body out of the spirit gliding around his garden, and into his nostrils breathes the breath of life. God calls this form Adam, or son of the red earth. He sees that it is good. He says to Adam, "Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." After his warning, he sends Adam off to bask in the beauty of the garden. It isn't long, though, until God sees that Adam is lonely. He says, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make an helpmeet for him." So God causes a deep sleep to fall upon Adam and takes out one of his ribs. From this rib, he creates woman. This woman is named Eve, or living one. Adam says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Both bodies are naked, with no shame or fear of their own nakedness. As Eve meanders through Eden, making her acquaintance with the flora and fauna, she comes across a serpent, coiling around the forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil. Upon finding out that this tree is the one and only that she is not allowed to eat from, the serpent licks his fangs. "Ye shall surely not die," he says to Eve, "for God knows that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Eve considers this point and decides that this fruit cannot be more of a danger than any of the others. So she takes a bite and sees that the fruit is good. In finding out that this fruit had a taste as sweet as all of the others, she takes the fruit to Adam so that he may also marvel at the dripping juice. After eating the fruit, both of their eyes are opened and they begin to feel shame and an urge to hide their naked bodies. So they sew together fig leaves to cover themselves. Then they hear the booming voice of God walking through the garden. God calls to Adam and says to him, "Where art thou?" And Adam says, "I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." God asks, "Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat?" Adam responds, "The woman who thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat." Upon asking Eve why, God understood that the serpent was to blame. God says to the serpent, "Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." And to Eve he says, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." And to Adam he says, "Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." God clothes Adam and Eve to alleviate the shame they have brought upon themselves. Then he says, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever." To prevent any further hurt from his creation and stop humans from accessing the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God sends Adam and Eve out from the Garden of Eden, commanding Adam to till the ground from which he was created. He places a flaming sword and cherubims at the east of the Garden of Eden to keep the tree of life protected. And there Eden sits, with its knowledge and its immortality forever out of our reach. What is this Eden? Why can't we have both wisdom and life? What does an helpmeet really mean, and what damage has it done in the modern day? Who wrote Genesis? Why? Now that we've laid out the story, let's dig in and answer some of the questions that your Sunday school teacher might not have. Hi, and welcome to Casey's Cabinet of Curiosities. I'm Casey. On this channel, I talk about literature, art, religion, and any other fun stuff I feel like. If you haven't already guessed, today we're doing a deep dive into the Bible, the very beginning of it all, Adam and Eve, not Steve, in the Garden of Eden. The creation story is the basis for any religion, so understanding it is integral to understanding the other beliefs and practices. This is the first story in the Bible and simultaneously one of, if not the most consequential. So I want to dive into the nuances and look at the story from a few different angles. First, we're going to talk about the books of Moses and the history of Genesis. Then we'll get into a little bit of biblical cosmology to sort of understand how the world was and is conceptualized according to that model. And then we'll get into some rhetorical analysis and some real world applications. So I've had a lot of fun writing this script, and I'm super excited to share it with you. I hope you're super excited to listen to it. So grab your cup of coffee, your knitting needles, start boiling your spaghetti noodles, start entering your journal entry, whatever it is that you're doing with this in the background. Let's get into the good stuff. So I actually have to cough, so I'm going to put a title page across the screen, and I will be right back. I need to go get more coffee. Okay, so let's start with, well, let me tell you the way that I wanted to do this. And of course, I want to eventually, I don't just want to stop at the creation story. I want to work my way through the Bible, through all of the big stories, and do a deep dive similar to this. And I wasn't sure about that, so I kind of got my toes wet with this one. And I had so much fun that I definitely want to continue doing it and, get better at it and go deeper. But the way that I started was I just opened the Bible and page 1, okay, and I started reading the story. And I just highlighted things and wrote things in the margins and just gave myself permission, unlimited permission, to ask questions. And then those questions became research topics, and then anything that I found that was interesting that stuck went into the outline, and here we are. So it did not take long, though, for me to come up with a question, because I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but when you look right above Genesis, it says the first book, what does it say? The first book of Moses, called Genesis. So I said to myself, Casey, what is the book of Moses? And if there's a first one, how many other ones are there? So that was the first thing I looked up. And in order to look it up, I type into my little computer, books of Moses. And I click on a link, and I'm reading through it. And it's kind of losing me, but I'm trying to understand. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is sort of esoteric, and it's weird that it's this esoteric for such a simple answer. And then it starts to mention Joseph Smith. And I looked up at the HTTP link, the URL. I don't know why I called it that. The URL. And I was on BrighamYoungUniversity.com. And that is when I learned that there is an entirely separate book of Moses. Well, it's not necessarily separate, but the Mormons and the Latter-day Saints have their own interpretation of the books of Moses. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying if you don't want that interpretation, look up Christian books of Moses, or the other names that it goes by, which are the Pentateuch, P-E-N-T, Pentateuch, and the Torah, which you may be familiar with as the word or the law, or more aptly the word in Judaism. So it's actually just the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? So the backstory here is Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We know, well, it is agreed upon by scholars, by people studying this, that these are the ones: Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the 5 books of Moses, otherwise known as the Pentateuch, or the Torah. So these were all written by Moses. 3 of them, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were thought to be dictated by God to Moses when he was on the mount. So what is going on today? So a quick story about, a quick overview of Moses and what he's popular for is the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and basically Moses came in and said, "Let my people go," and the Pharaoh said, "Hell no." And so then God intervened, and then the people got free, and Moses led them to the promised land, and the land of milk and honey, if you will. And so, do you guys hear my chicken outside? She's going insane. She's just in the coop, screaming. So anyway, he goes up on the mount once he gets them to the promised land, and he gets this message from God. He gets the 10 commandments, and he gets God's laws for the people, and he talks to God and writes this all down on a stone tablet, and then he brings it down to the people. And that's the law of Christianity, or the Torah, right? The law of the people according to God. So Leviticus, so Moses is important because he is in the Bible. He's seen as important because he's the only one that, good Lord, that's so distracting. He's the only one that received direct word from God like that, right? So nobody else in the Bible spoke to God the way that Moses did. And God didn't speak to anybody else directly the way that he spoke to Moses. And so these books are taken to be specifically important because God must have really wanted this information out if it's the only time he was willing to communicate with someone this directly, right? So that's important to note, and that's why these books carry so much weight in religious literature specifically. So we know, okay, so Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those are, again, the 10 commandments and the other laws that talk about, that's where you see a woman on her menstrual cycle needs to isolate herself because she's unclean. That's where you see your fabric specifications, and like pork is unclean and shellfish is unclean. That's where you see those orthodox rules being introduced in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch, in those books of Moses, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So then Exodus, it's not laws, it's actually a biography, kind of an autobiography. If it was written by Moses, then he was writing it about himself and his story of freeing the Israelites from slavery and taking them to the land of milk and honey. So all of that's good. Exodus through Deuteronomy. 3 of them, God told him through a burning bush, which makes perfect sense. Okay, that's easy. We can write that one off logically. Good deal. Exodus, he was his autobiography, so that's easy enough. Genesis, though, how would he have written Genesis when he wasn't there, right? He wasn't there for the creation, and we know that because Adam was the first human, and there wasn't enough. Moses didn't come along for another few lifetimes, and so how does he know that? How does he know what it was? How does he know what it was before the earth was created, right? There are, of course, a few theories for this. One, he received the information on the mount while he was getting the commandments. So God told him the story of the creation. God said, this is what happened, write it down. Now, scholars don't feel like this is the most likely, just because it would kind of be too separate, and that's not really what he went up to the mount for, and there's no other indication that he had this conversation with God, right? And it would just be an odd thing to throw in there. It wouldn't make sense, and it's out of order. And then there would be a conversation at the burning bush, and then an autobiography, and then a conversation at the burning bush, and it would have been an odd way to organize it, right? So the second theory, that's also not quite as accepted, but maybe a possibility, is that he didn't write it at all. He did not write Genesis. He did not write the books of Moses. Somebody else wrote them and used his name to add authority to their work, which was a commonplace practice back then. Even throughout the medieval times, there were writers that went by names such as Hermes Trismegistus is the most popular one I can think of, who wrote occult texts under that pen name, because when you see the name Hermes, it just automatically gives you the assumption of knowledge and godlike, commerce and understanding and all of the things that Hermes or Mercury are associated with. So that was a common practice back then, and it is possible, but the most likely and the most accepted theory is that people like Adam and Abraham and other patriarchs kept record of what happened, and then Moses referred to them in writing Genesis, which means that God used Moses as more of an editor than an author, but it would make sense that Adam and Abraham had kept track of their lineage and had kept track of all of these things for themselves, and then Moses found those records later. So I think that's probably a pretty solid theory. I think it's got at least a little bit of ground, right? So now that we understand the history of Genesis and why it was written and the significance of it, I want to paint a better picture. Okay, so everything stopped recording and started glitching, which was fun. Good sign, off to a good start. But I'm just going to re-record this whole section and go from there. Also, I did take the sunglasses off of my head because I am inside and I looked ridiculous. Sorry. Anyways, but we understand a little bit more about the history of Genesis. I want to paint a better picture of how they viewed the world back then. The wording in the Bible is sort of archaic, and some of the concepts are foreign to the modern world. So I want to quickly break down what the Bible is talking about when it says things like the firmament or splitting the waters from the waters. If you're interested in this, the name of it is biblical cosmology. Let me pop it up on screen here so you can see how it's spelt. Okay. And there are tons of videos and articles about it to parse through. It's kind of hard to conceptualize, so graphics definitely help. I'm actually going to pop one up on screen here. This is from a channel called NetZerumNet that I use to try and understand what was going on, get to the bottom of things here. So check that out if you're interested. I'm just going to do enough of a summary here so that you have a basic understanding and we can move forward. So if you want, a deeper dive, go for it. I think that this channel in particular is definitely trying to proselytize you a little bit, but that's also par for the course with this type of content. So, take what resonates and leave what doesn't, I guess. But so here's the graphic. And Genesis starts off by saying, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness moved upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." So let's imagine that, okay? hit your little pen, okay? Get your imagination rolling, close your eyes, think about it, think hard, put your noggin on, turn it on. It's completely dark, completely silent. You're surrounded by still, deep, heavy, black waters. That's it. And then God creates light in the darkness. Light, not sun. A formless, shapeless light that goes in every direction. And then he creates the firmament, which means vault or arch of the sky to divide the waters. This is heaven. So you can see up here, that's the little, I'm sure that I'm not pointing at the right place, but that's the little Colosseum looking thing with, it looks like a Colosseum. That's heaven. That's the firmament, because you can see there are waters above it and there are waters below it. So that's the first thing that God built. And now, instead of his formless spirit moving across the face of the waters, he's got a place to contain his energy. Hello. He's got a place to contain his energy. So that is step 1. Now, step 2, God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. So now we've got earth below the heavens. The sky and sea are divided and land is gathered. And you can see it kind of was conceptualized as like an open front stage almost, not a globe. The picture sort of demonstrates that, and it sort of demonstrates that it's supposed to be a vertical landscape, right? So theoretically, God can look down from his firmament, like look down like that and see what's happening on Earth. So the solar system looks different in this model too. I'm actually going to pop up another graphic on screen. This one is from Introduction to Traditional Astrology by Charles Oberts. So definitely not necessarily relevant to today's topic, but if you are interested in that, incredible book. I also know a great reader if you're interested, if you're looking for readings. But anyway, so here's our graphic. So God here is represented by the primum mobile, the prime mover, the beginning, the start. And we'll get into that again a little later. But primum mobile basically means God. So you can see that God is up at the top and he can look down, and right below his feet, he sees the stars moving. And then, below that, he can look down a little further down and he can see Saturn moving. Jupiter below that, and so on and so forth. And then at the very bottom, from all the way up in his firmament, God can see us walking around on earth as ants or grasshoppers. In Isaiah, it says he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. And that is the NIV translation. So the Genesis passages that I've been pulling, if you couldn't tell by the English in it, they were all KJV because that's the copy that I have on hand. That's not massive. But that passage I looked up on Google, so it's NIV. I want to try to be clear about what translation I'm using because there's already enough confusion. I don't want to add to that. Anyway, moving forward, this is the way to visualize the biblical cosmology. This is how the Earth and the solar system was thought of in that time. Now, keep in mind, this is not just like a Christian biblically view. That's not just the specific to Christians or the Bible of that time. This was the view of most of the ancient world. Again, astrology and astronomy, which were kind of linked at that time, as well as a lot of myth and religion, were built from this worldview. So this is kind of, good for the Bible, but also a nice little historical piece to know how we viewed the world back then. So we didn't have telescopes. How were we supposed to know? This also happens, coincidentally, I'm sure, to be the worldview of a lot of flat earthers, citing Genesis and biblical cosmology as proof that the earth is flat. So I'm not saying that the Bible causes problems sometimes or anything, but okay, now let's get into a little bit of, now that we've kind of gotten the history of it, we've gotten the story and we've gotten the history. So now let's get some analyses in. Let's just dive in, tear the verses apart, ask some questions, and then answer them. Shall we? Let's do it. So by the fourth day, God creates the great, so, by the third day, biblical cosmology is created. By the fourth day, God creates the great whales and every living creature that moveth. So that's straightforward. We now have living creatures in this garden, which he told, of course, to be fruitful and multiply. So then I want to stop at Genesis 1:26. That's where we're going to take our first detour. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle," so on and so forth. So my first question was, who the fuck is us? And our. Why is he talking in multiples? There's one God as far as I know, right? So, according to this story. So I looked it up and surprise, surprise, there's contention and theories and, no one agrees on anything, but let's run through some of the most accepted ones. So it's important to note first that in this passage, when he's creating humans, God did not say, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be living creatures, great whales and whatever. Here he says, let us. So it kind of indicates more intimacy. It already creates a feeling of closeness with humans that he doesn't have with his other creations. And on top of that, he grants us dominion over everything. Everything else on the earth is below us, according to the creation story. So this kind of demonstrates that humans are set apart in the biblical worldview. We are not one with the rest of the earth. We are in dominion of the earth. Nothing could go wrong with that. Nothing. So theory one, he's referring to himself and the assembly of angels in heaven mentioned later on in the Bible. That's theory one. He's saying us as in me and my angels. This one is thought to fall flat though, because nowhere else does it mention the angels taking on the form of God. So it's not really our image, because the angels don't really look like God. They don't take on his same image. And if you've been on the internet in the past 2 years, then you know that we, who were created in God's image, do not look like biblically accurate angels. Most of us. So another hypothesis suggests that the plural form is used to convey dignity and splendor. So this is actually a language device that I've never heard of called plural of majesty. So it kind of means what it says, that you add multiple people when it adds strength and backing and weight to your words. So that's another theory. And then the most agreed upon theory, I think, according to what I could find, is that he's referring to himself as the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. To me, that's a simple enough answer. I might change my mind later, but Occam's razor right now, and that seems plausible. And that's plausible. Anyway. So I'm going to take just the simplest approach with that one. Let's go with that. So God and the us create humans. Important note though, Adam has not been created yet. Adam does not exist. Humanity doesn't have a form. If you go back to the second verse of Genesis, it says, "And the earth was without form, and void and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." that sort of paints a picture and tells us what the human looked like, because it was made in that image, the image of God, which was formless and shapeless. So there was no body for the human, it was just a spirit. So after creating humanity, God sees that this is good. As Genesis 2:1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made and sanctified it, because that in it he rested from all his work which God created and made." That was an insane way to word that. But anyways, God has finished creating. This is where we get the Sabbath, the day to rest. I haven't ever practiced the Sabbath. Like, even when I grew up in church, that was just not something that we put a lot of stock into. And now I spend most of my Sundays holy rolling for sure, but, not in the same way. So I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with the Sabbath, but I've always thought it was a nice little build into a religion to decree a day of rest. Some people celebrate the Sabbath on different days, and I would really like to know how that came about also. So if you want a deep dive on the history of the Sabbath, let me know, nerds. But right now, we have bigger fish to fry, okay? I want to get into the creations of human in a human form. Humans in a human form. Okay, so Adam, formless, shapeless piece of ether, whatever you want to call him. Then God says, if I want a body to till my garden and maintain my creation, then I have to create a body. And that he does. He breathes life into Adam, and Adam is loaded with esoteric symbolism. I don't want to get into Kabbalah stuff right now because this isn't an occult video, and I don't know if I'll ever get into Kabbalah stuff in general because it's just so hard to do it justice, and it's just so vast. And I also it's just not my specialty. But I do want to touch on a Kabbalistic concept known as Adam Kadmon. So let's back up and let's talk about what the Kabbalah is first, if you don't know. What the Kabbalah is it's essentially a traditional way of understanding God. So I'm going to explain this super quick to the best of my ability, just so I don't lose you. Please keep in mind that I'm being like the mother of all bastardizers right now, the way that I'm explaining this. I am really simplifying it, but I just don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole because it is an easy one to fall into. So I'm going to pop this graphic up on screen. This is actually, again, not relevant to today's topic, but super helpful. This is from The Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune. If you're interested in the Kabbalah, read it. Although if you're interested in the Kabbalah, you've probably already heard of it. And if you have never heard of the Kabbalah before, this isn't where I'd recommend starting, but you do you. It's a cool graphic. So anyway, you see up here, you've got this white halo little thing. That is God, the Ein Sof, the Primum Mobile, the prime mover. That is the beginning. That is the holy light. Undiluted, straight God energy, okay? And then all of these other circles, these little colorful balls, which are called Sephiroth, I think that's the plural, they are kind of filters. So the holy light filters all the way down through all of these colorful bubbles, and then that explains kind of how we see it. That bottom bubble that's got multiple colors, that's the holy light plus all of these filters that get more secular and more worldly as it goes down the tree. That becomes earth. That bubble at the bottom is earth. And so it kind of is just a visual demonstration of how light up here from God reflects through lenses down to earth, and how we get a filtered, diluted version of God. Because if we were to look straight upon God, we would, be burst into flames or whatever. So this is used a lot in in a lot of different types of mysticism. So you'll actually see the Kabbalah spelled a few different ways. With a K, it means Hebrew mysticism, Jewish mysticism. with a Q, it means kind of a Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley touch on it and a cult esoteric touch, which is what the Dion Fortune book talks about. And then with a C, that's more associated with Christian mysticism. And also with the Kabbalah, you kind of want to be careful because you don't want to, again, it's a whole thing. Let's just move on. Okay? So now that you have a basic understanding of the Kabbalah, you see that head under the Ein Sof, that is Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon he does get a last name. I know, exciting, right? So you have to note about him that he is, again, a symbol. He is the symbol of the bridge between the primordial nothing and us. He was an endless mass of human spirit given the breath of God, just an endless mass. And he was the first time that endless, boundless spirit was contained into a body of flesh. And so he was the first one to bridge to take that Holy Spirit and put it into a body of flesh. And so he is the bridge from God to us. We are separated from God because we are human, because we cannot look upon God, and because we have these bodies of flesh and we're not immortal. We are separated from him. Adam served as the bridge. Adam gave us an outlet. And Adam gave us that connection, if that makes sense. Now, let's stop. Super exciting. Okay, art appreciation time. I'll show you my favorite version, and then I'll show you the original version. Okay, it's upside down, but here is my favorite version of the art piece. See, you can tell I'm really about my shit, all right? But let's pull up the original. Here's my man Michelangelo right here. The creation of Adam. Why was that a school bus? Maybe. So you see, you got God in his little kidney looking thing. If you weren't aware, this was painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So Michelangelo was laying on his back with a paintbrush painting this. They don't make men like they used to. They just don't. They don't make people like they used to. But anyway, so this is the piece of art. It's a very famous piece of art. It's one of the most well-known in the world, especially in the Western world. But it depicts that. Their hands are almost touching, but they're not quite. Because we can never quite touch God. But Adam gets us close. Adam Kadmon, the creation of human, got us close. So I love art. I have an art degree actually, and you can't really see it, but I've got art all over the place, and I love art. So I love when I can connect the art piece to the inspiration of it, and connect those dots for myself and interpret it for myself. And so I just kind of wanted to throw that in there, that when you see that painting, now you know kind of what the context is. Now, art class is over. It's time to get serious. We have some things to get through. And no more fun. It's not going to be fun for a minute. Because let's talk about what happens next. Adam's body is created from dust. Now a bridge has been created from heaven to earth. Great. But it's not too long before God looks down at the little ant, singular, and sees that Adam is really, really struggling. His little dishes, he's having a hard time washing them in the river. And his little socks, he's having a hard time picking them up. And those little fig leaf toilet paper crumbles, he's having a hard time cleaning them out of his ass. So God says he needs a helpmeet. I'll tell you, I was going to try to structure this part in an academic way. My plan was to go through the history of the term helpmeet and to kind of parse out what it meant in biblical times, and what marriage looked like back then, and if it was more relevant then than it is now, and how we have kind of mistranslated it over the years. That's what I wanted to do. Two things. One, I cannot do that in the scope of this video. I would love, and probably will do that in an entirely different video, just talk about the history of this help meet tradwife thing, especially now because it's relevant, but I just can't cover it the way that I want to in that kind of way in this section. Problem number two is that I am not gonna sit here and waste my time telling you how the good actors meant for it to be interpreted when there are only bad actors currently interpreting it. And we are seeing rights getting taken away from minorities and women, and just we're seeing it. I don't have to tell you. You have eyes. Look outside. So I don't care, frankly, what it was supposed to mean. I don't care what the good people are saying about it. I care about demonstrating how this term has been used to further fascist regimes and use women as cattle. So that is what I am going to do today. Okay? Deal. Let's lay our foundations. Straight from Sunday school, the story goes that Adam was lonely and, couldn't get his skid marks out of his undies. So God put him into a deep sleep. While he slept, God removed a piece of his rib to create Eve. Stop the press right there. Important note. Adam was created from the dust of the earth, while Eve was created from Adam, right? No matter how you slice it, that's important because Eve is made from the same substance of Adam. This indicates sort of that humans aren't going to be made from scratch anymore. This signifies that Adam, as the bridge, God created him and then he created another human. Does that make sense? So they were unified in marriage and they were created to be a complement to each other, which I know I'm getting ahead of myself here. I know I am. But it's always weird to me that people use this biblical couple as an item to look up to, or as like the perfect complementary couple, because it's like, not only did they have one job and fuck it up, beyond belief, okay? But when they did, God was like, hey, Adam, why did you eat this apple? And Adam was like, it's her fault. Blame her. He wasn't even in the hot seat. God just asked him a question and he just folded. I don't know about you, but that's not what I'm interested in. Sorry. But so I looked up the first thing I did, read that, go on Google. What does help meet really mean in Genesis? Just to try to get, go somewhere. And there were a lot of results. And this is kind of when I started to realize that that is going to be a longer research topic that I'm able to do here. The results came from a lot of different places. Again, top result, the LDS, their SEO is insane. A Mormon Facebook group, Catholics, Seventh-day Adventists, Lutherans. And then I saw one, and it was a website called The Redeemed Wife. And that one piqued my interest because it was not somebody teaching the doctrine of it necessarily, as much as it is a woman who is living this lifestyle of biblical womanhood and of being a biblical wife and writing about it. So I felt like that was the best example. I wanted to take personal accounts of what it means to be a helpmeet. Okay? So I have taken 2 personal accounts and I'm going to read excerpts from both. The first one is going to be called, it's by The Redeemed Wife and it's called What Does a Helpmeet Even Mean? And then the second one is actually an excerpt from Tia Levings' book, A Well-Trained Wife. I am going to go ahead and tell you now that once I get into the Tia Levings section, I'll put it on screen before I start, but there is a massive, massive, massive trigger warning. If sexual assault is something that upsets you, even remotely, do not listen to it. Tia Levings is a phenomenal writer, and she knows exactly how to get her awful feelings across to the reader. And if it is something that is going to upset you, do not listen to it. Okay? I will not blame you. I understand. It made me sick the first 5 times I listened to it, and I don't particularly want to read it out loud today. What is going on outside? Flashback Mary over here. Let's move that, dude. What does helpmeet even mean? If you are a wife, then you are called to be your husband's helpmeet. And if you are not yet a wife, but are praying to be one day, then you will be called to be your husband's helpmeet, and as the Lord so wills. I can ask many women today what they believe this word means, and I'll either get a blank look or a shortened definition of simply helping her husband. But it is important we know what helpmeet really means when God says it in the Word. I will go ahead and begin this blog with a warning of sorts. If you already don't trust God at His Word, then none of these blogs will be profitable for you. God has not called me to teach with my feelings or cater to others' feelings, and neither teach my truth or your truth, for neither of those are the truth, but to teach by His word alone, obediently, led by His Spirit alone. The more you surrender to Christ, the more beauty you'll see in His order and His ways for all that He has created and designed for His good pleasure and His glory. He is wise, I am not. The Lord says you were created for your husband. One biblical definition for the word helpmeet is a helper suited to, worthy of, or corresponding to him. Proper, fit, perfect, good, well-equipped in meeting his needs. Bottom line, we need each other. It is a symbiotic relationship. He is the head under Christ. You are the body that helps the head get things done. And what an honor that is. You are his counterpart, his suitable helper, his confidant in battle. And sister, we are in battle. In the areas where he is weak, you may be strong. In the areas where you are weak, he is strong. But all bringing glory to the Lord in your unity and obedience. Him loving you as Christ loves the church, and you reverencing and submitting to him as the church unto Christ. Your husband, whether you like it or not, is the final shot caller. He may come to you for advice and guidance if he so sees fit, but at the end of the day, you are to help meet his plans for your lives as long as it's nothing that outright goes against the word of God, such as harming yourself or others in any way, even spiritually. And also his mission in Christ. For you were created for him. Not my words, but God's. How I may be a helpmeet to my husband doesn't necessarily mean that is how God calls you to be a helpmeet to yours. Your husband may desire you to work also to contribute to the family funds, which is not unbiblical at all. To rub his feet after a long day, to have a fresh hot pot of coffee ready for him in the mornings, to bring him lunch on his job every day, to look presentable and modest by a certain hour, which, as God's daughter, you should do anyway, or to simply be the smile he sees every morning when he wakes up and every night before he goes to bed. Just be his helpmeet and with a merry heart. As written in Proverbs 17:22, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a crushed spirit drieth the bones. Please do not read this blog and think you are inferior, dear soul. Do not let the enemy pervert what is good. Did you know the Lord says you are a gift to your husband? How beautiful is that? A virtuous, godly woman is a crown to her husband. more than a precious jewel, and any man of God knows that. My husband surely reminds me often. I want you to read this paragraph with a holy fear and awful reverence to and for God, because though it be last, it is surely not least. Our earthly marriages are supposed to reflect the spiritual marriage of Christ and his betrothed, the church. We are to set an example for all those who look upon our marriages of God's beautiful, wondrous work and love for us and our adoration and respect for him. Marriage is not always easy. As I have said before and will say again, it is hard and holy work, and worth every bit of it. It does not come without trial, but if you two be in the Lord, your three-corded string will not be easily broken. So let's not bring open neither private shame unto the Lord by our disobedience to his word and trying to do things our own way, believing ourselves to know better. O foolish woman who thinks she knows better than God and his order. I once was one, and I have never experienced such peace, rest, joy, and dare I even say empowerment since I surrendered my will to his. My marriage is blessed for it, so very blessed. Okay, and this next one is from chapter 5 of Tia Levings' A Well-Trained Wife. I bounded into my first home with Alan, candy store excitement on my face. We were married. I'd make Alan an excellent wife and embrace every duty with joy, and we'd have what Elizabeth Elliot wrote, the reward for following God's plan. Confident joy reverberated through me like a happy string concerto. I set the basket of reception leftovers on the counter and stood in my kitchen. My very own magic kingdom. I wanted to sing. Let's get you out of that dress, Alan said. I'll need help with the buttons, I said. Alan tugged on 104 buttons, careful not to tear my gown. The bodice released and birdseed fell out. I giggled, careful not to spread it onto the floor. Alan led me to the bed. Deep inside, I was, please don't hurt me, nervous, but I hoped he couldn't tell. Sing, smile, you made it. Tonight would be magic. Relax, he said. I know what I'm doing. Jessica. 4 others whose names I couldn't remember. He knew where he wanted to put his hands and where he wanted to put mine. I wondered if someone taught men or if they just knew. I shrugged the thought away and raised my mouth, ready for kisses as the chosen one. But this night, Alan didn't spend time kissing or groping. Instead, he tore into me like long-awaited mail, shocking me with dry, hard stabs and strokes. I gasped from searing pain as my skin broke, and then my body went numb. It hurts, I said, crying. Please stop. His body stiffened, and he grabbed my hair in 2 fists. I felt him release. He rolled off of me. It's better to get it over with fast, he said. After a little while, I heard him snoring. I moved words around in my mind. Sacred, holy, passion, better to get it over with. I stared at the ceiling. Shadows from the streetlights made the long fingers of bare trees dance as the wind blew outside. I curled up onto my side and tried to sleep, glad it was over. Hands woke me, turning my body onto my stomach. He spread my legs with his hand and got on top of me, tearing me open again. I buried cries into the pillow. This time, please and stop, and that hurts constricted in my throat. I tried to hold my breath, submerge into darkness, but my jagged exhale came with sound. A cry I knew didn't sound like pleasure. Behind closed eyes, I saw home. My old bedroom with its twin bed and locked door. I tried to go there in my mind, but it didn't work. Plaster ceiling, tree shadows, wind, time. He finished and rolled off, dragging a wet slug across my leg. I wiped it away with the bedsheet. My body, rigid and braced, refused sleep. I watched the tree fingers instead. When he pressed into me a third time, I detached and left my body. I watched in silence from the shadowed corner across the room, small and very sorry for that poor girl. What did it mean to have a husband? The Christian wife is responsible for the peace and happiness of her home. She has to meet his needs. Why had no one told me what that really meant? In Intended for Pleasure, the Christian sex book we'd been given as a gift, it said that the marriage bed was a holy place in the sight of God. I was supposed to be one with Alan now and look at him with such reverence that he'd become a king among men. Our marriage was now a private little kingdom, secluded from view. So I hope that those two passages side by side are able to speak for themselves about the dangers regarding the helpmeet ideals and how faith-based service and turning off logic and turning off your own needs and being told that your purpose is to serve somebody else happily is dangerous. And it's not just abstractly dangerous. It's getting women killed every single day. Again, with the resurgence of these trad wife ideals going around, I would love to take a crack at an academic helpmeet trad wife Proverbs 31 deep dive one day soon. But hopefully sooner rather than later. But for now, let me say this. If you do not ever take anything else from this channel, hear me when I say this. Use the brain that you were given. Do not put your ability to think onto anyone else. God, robot, or human. Use your critical thinking skills and don't let anyone numb them because that's how they get you, okay? Critical thinking is so important. Anyone, but especially the women, okay? You are not foolish and you are wise, and your decisions are not wrong and you are not less than. And I want to throw it out there too, that if this is something that you are experiencing, domestic violence of the religious kind or any other kind, there are people supporting you and there are ways out, and that does not have to be life. You deserve a better life than that. And there are hotline links and numbers down in the description below. So let's move forward. Genesis 3, new chapter. This is where it gets a little spicy because we have our serpent slithering in to stir the pot a little bit. A few things to remember. In Genesis 2:9, it says, "The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." So remember that. And that's something that maybe I knew when I was a kid, but I hadn't realized it as an adult, that there are two important trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the original design is, the tree of life, of course, gave them immortality, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil gave them knowledge of good and evil, right? So they were allowed to eat from the tree of life, which means apparently humans were supposed to be immortal. That was the original plan. We weren't supposed to die, right? So the original design is that Adam and Eve are immortals that kind of co-rule with God. They are separate from him, yes, but they are meant to rule over the earth in the same way that God rules over the heavens. They were not necessarily, they were meant to be his co-workers. And God isn't a high turnover type of guy, so of course they have to live for a long time, so they get to be immortal. I started wondering about this, so I looked it up. There is, again, contention about it, whether or not they could sexually reproduce before the fall. I went on a lot of forums, like biblical discussion forums, and also Reddit, because why not? People think that since God said, be fruitful and multiply to humans as well, he said it a second time to Adam and Eve. They probably had the ability to multiply, and the goal was like a worldwide class of ruling humans. Would they have procreated using that genitalia? I don't know, but I would think so. That would be my assumption. Saint Augustine of Hippo, who lived from 354 to 430 AD, he was the originator of the idea that there was actually no fruit and that the forbidden fruit was sexual knowledge. The two discovered pleasure, and that was the sin. Again, I don't see how that could go wrong. Anyway, let's take a minute, though, to break down the implications of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because I think that this is really interesting, and this kind of piqued my interest. See, this is why I wear sunglasses, because otherwise my hair, I just blow dried it, and it's in my face. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to fidget. Just pretend it's sunny. At least I'm not wearing them on my face. They are sideways a little bit, though. I was going to straighten my hair. I just didn't want to. So, I want to pause for a minute, though, to break down the implications of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because that was something that was really fascinating to me as I was researching, because it doesn't imply that God didn't want Adam and Eve to be able to do trigonometry, right? He didn't necessarily mind them knowing things. Because in fact, they would have had to know a lot. They would have had to know animal names and habits, plant cultivation, weather patterns. I mean, in order to live in this garden, they would have been knowledgeable people. So they were allowed to learn. They were allowed to have brains, and they were allowed to think. What they weren't allowed to do, though, was to develop their own moral compass. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. God is the one that's telling them what's right and wrong. They don't need to start deciding for themselves, because then they might decide wrong. They might not agree with God, and then it becomes a problem, because now God has direct competition. If we just let God be our moral compass, then there's no room for error. So that's not how it went, though, of course. We all know that. So after Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, they realized that they were naked, and they began to feel shame for their nakedness. Right there, immediately, they developed a different moral compass. Immediately, they started to feel shame for something that God felt there was no need to feel shame for. How can they help him co-rule his creation when they have a different view of that creation and what's right and what's wrong? Honestly, the part where God finds out kind of makes me sad, because they didn't have to do him like that, and they really hurt his feelings. I'm just saying, they didn't have to do him like that. But God finds out what happened, and he doles out his punishments. So we're going to go through those. First, the snake. What did he get? What was his reward? He gets to be cursed above all cattle and every other animal, basically, and has to crawl on his stomach, which is diabolical. The Abrahamic God might be a dick, but he gets points for creativity as well as delivery, because he really said, eat dust, bitch. And I also wanted to throw in this disturbing little ditty, okay, because before God dropped the fattest diss track of the BC era, this is what people thought that serpents looked like. So let's just take a little look at this. Let's just look at her. Gorgeous. Are you awake? Not tired anymore? Focused in? A little unsettled? Good. So to Eve, he says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Again, you have to wonder what the alternative would have been had sin not taken place, had they not eaten the fruit. The great thing about reading, though, especially with texts like this, is that you can both study it and peel back all of the layers and interpret the symbolism. Read between the lines, think critically, ask questions, come up with answers to your questions, ask more questions, answer those too. In the process of doing this, here's the theory that I came up with. Let me know what you think and let me know what your theories are. I'm interested because, again, there is not one right answer. This is a text that leaves room for interpretation. Interpret it. So I think that in Eve's punishment, where he says, thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee, I think that desire is the key word there. And that's what makes our reproduction more painful than other animals. That's the curse, allegedly. Let me paint a picture for you, okay? Let me get you on board. You, a girly, are in your bed at night. It's 2 a.m. You hit your pen a little bit, maybe had a little bit of wine, you're watching The Sopranos, you're up a little later than you should be, scrolling through your situationships Facebook, and you notice that he really likes coffee. So you say, next time I go to see him, I'm going to bring him a coffee, because I would love to see his bright blue eyes light up, and I would love to feel his big, strong arms give me a hug, and I would love for him to ask me to be his girlfriend, and then maybe we can have a relationship, and he'll take me on a date, and then once he knows I like coffee, we can have all these cute coffee dates, and then it's almost like his ears are burning, because you get a text in the midst of this from him. It's now 2:07 a.m., and his text reads, hey, you up? Consequences of original sin in action. Ladies, blame yourself. Seriously though, in my opinion at present, I think that's what it's getting at here, that Eve is gonna long for her husband, she will desire him, and sex will be anything but neutral, whereas to other members of the animal kingdom, it's more of a neutral thing. For us, that's not the case. And the punishment is extended, though, because then he says to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of thy wife and have eaten of the tree, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. So not only is Eve cursed with a desire for this man, but he's literally never going to have time to fulfill that desire because he's so busy trying to get food on the table. Then she can't fulfill that desire because she's so busy with painful childbearing and being the traitor of all women and shit. So strife has been planted because of that desire, and that strife carries through. Does that make sense? I think that's the meaning that I parsed out from it. So again, let me know what you think though. Another interesting thing, God made them clothes. And it's interesting because he didn't say, no, don't be ashamed of your nakedness. He kind of fed into their shame. He said, if this is how you feel, fine. If you want to be ashamed of this, keep it up. Here you go. That being said, the garments that he created for them were made of animal skin, which, if you didn't know, in the Old Testament, before Christ died for our sins, the only way to atone for them was to sacrifice an animal. So by creating these garments, he both solidified their separation from him because he allowed them to keep that moral compass. He allowed them to keep that knowledge, but he also sacrificed an animal to cleanse them of their sins. So I guess maybe that speaks to God being kind of like not the worst, maybe a goat. I don't know. But it's an interesting paradox, whatever it speaks to, I think. So Genesis 3:22 is also a really fascinating one to me because it says, "And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken." So basically, because they now maintained the knowledge of God, they were forbidden to have the immortality as well. What a thorn that would have been in God's side, right? Mythic figures don't typically like for other immortal beings to have different ideas of them. As I'm breaking this down, it's really conjuring up thoughts of Kronos and Zeus and the ways that they were always scheming to stay in solitary power. Same stories, same meaning, kind of, sort of, but different day, right? So before we finish up, I want to talk about the implications of chapter 3 because I think that it's very important. In the story, we were given immortality. We were allowed and expected to live forever. But then we got too smart. We developed knowledge and our own moral compass. And that is what made us dangerous. Even if you live forever, you can't do anything if you don't know anything. But once you know how to decide right and wrong for yourself, you're public enemy number one, right? In the words of Descartes, I believe, Descartes, I don't know, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. According to the Bible, your brain is what makes you godlike. So again, please use it critically. Put some wrinkles in there. Learn. Be curious. We finish up with God driving them out of Eden and placing cherubims and a flaming sword to keep Eden and the tree of life protected for eternity. Actually, just until the flood with Noah, but we'll get there later. Eden sits there abandoned. Our paradise lost, right? Ignorance and immortality could have been our life. But instead, I have to pay the IRS and unclog my toilet. Yippee. Thanks, guys. Isn't that just a gorgeous image, though? The idea of this pristine garden and like a massive tree as the focal point, surrounded by these angels, and then just like a gyrating, flaming sword at the east gate. It's gorgeous, it's profound, it's poignant. So we've had fun today, I hope. I hope you've learned something about Genesis, the symbolism, the potential for danger, and just had fun taking a closer look at this really popular and oft-spread story as it's understood today. So if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and most importantly, leave a comment. I would love to see, even if I have like 5 people that watch this, 5 people creating a marketplace of ideas in my comments would be enough to make me happy. So if you have a comment, leave it, talk to me, say hey, light it up, regardless of your religious views, I will say. Because this is open. I guess I should have prefaced this. This is an academic thing. Whatever your religious views are, you are welcome here. Everyone is welcome here. No judgment from me. But that being said, regardless of what your views are, there is always power in allegory. So I'm going to leave you with this. In your daily life, are you running around in circles trying to access the tree of life because you think it will make you better? Or are you aware that the tree of life isn't the elixir? The knowledge that you already have in your brain from the fruit that you already ate is what makes you godlike. Are you treating it that way? And are you using it? Well, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I hope it's warm and sunny where you are. And I will catch up with you guys next time. Bye.